everyone, and welcome to tonight's planning commission. As please stand for the pledge of allegiance, followed by a moment of silence. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. Please be seated. Jackie, can I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Eric Rogers.
Here.
Commissioner Joe Zappa.
Here.
Commissioner Jim Drabowski.
Here.
Commissioner Cheryl Mance. Here. Commissioner Ryan Lane.
Here.
Trustee Craig Roberts.
Here.
President Jeff Knudsen.
Here. Item 2 on tonight's agenda is public hearings. We have none. Citizen comments. This is an opportunity for citizens to share their opinions with the board members on any topic they choose. However, due to Wisconsin open meeting laws, the board is not able to answer questions or respond to your comments. All comments should be directed to the board. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per speaker. Speakers are asked to use the podium and state their name and address for the record. Is there anybody here that would like to make a comment at this time? Yes, sir.
Tim Bramall, 498 Park Avenue. We've got several comments as it relates to the zoning discussion as far as, first comment is related to the 15-foot height of accessory garages. And before I get into that, I want to add that I believe I had a conversation with Mary years ago as it relates to our zoning requirements and the viability of achieving a variance to say minimum lot size requirements. Minimum lot size requirements.
Is it not on? Tap your finger on it. No, why not?
So the dark batteries.
I wonder if that's what it is.
Oh, I guess just speak up. Fortunately, there's not many.
So I'll start with that. I believe several years ago I had a conversation with Mary as to the R5 requirements, and specifically I was speaking to her regarding the potential for variances as it relates to minimum lot size requirements, minimum width requirements, and essentially that conversation concluded with there's no chance the board or the planning commission would approve such a thing without rewriting the code. Which brings me to my comments related to the alterations that you intend on making to the building code in the R5 district as it relates to accessory garages. So my question rhetorically is, I understand the village issued permits or authorized construction of a new home with an attached garage, as well as a detached garage, which is not permitted by the R5 zoning. So rhetorically, is that how we manage our code? Is to screw up, issue permits, and then alter the code to meet what was permitted to be built in that R5 district? Further on the R5 district, the 15-foot height for an accessory structure, I brought this to Scott and Dan Yates' attention. The means by which it's described to measure that height is from the entrance of that garage. However, it doesn't take into account greater slope. So when you have, for example, Highland or Maple Avenue with a 45-degree slope, you were to build a garage with a 15-foot height, your gable ends would be in the dirt. So I believe that section needs to be rewritten to describe how to properly measure that, taking into account grade and slope. In addition, you have in the R5 district a 42-foot maximum height requirement for a home. And to me, a 15-foot height requirement on a garage doesn't correspond to a 42-foot home being built. A 20-foot garage, a 20-foot home and a 15-foot garage, sure, aesthetically and architecturally that's appealing, but a 42-foot home and a 15-foot garage makes no sense to me aesthetically. It's as it relates to the R5, you have the lake overlay district as far as the non-lake overlay district, and the requirements set forth in those requirements as relates to square footage in lot size. If you look at Park Avenue to Prospect, in the Lake Overlay District, there's at most one house that meets the minimum square footage requirements. If you look at the non-overlay district, you have at most one house that meets the width and maximum lot size minimums. So I believe it's the intent or the purpose of the R5 zoning requirements is to have additional development conform to the neighborhood. But you have properties in these districts that 99% of don't conform to the minimum regulations. So I guess my suggestion, as it relates to the changes you're considering as it relates to these R5 accessory structures, is that you consider taking a larger look at the entirety of the R5 regulations as it relates to minimum lot width, minimum lot size, so that they conform more to what the village has currently. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else in the room that would like to make a comment at this time? No? Okay, thank you for your comments. Item 4 on the agenda is the approval of the regular planning commission meeting October 10th, 2019. I hope everybody's had a chance to look them over. Are there any questions, corrections, or comments as to the way they are presented this evening?
Jeff, on item 5, which actually spills onto several pages, somewhere in here, and I don't even know where to tell you to place it, but Mary made a comment that I think is important, that needs to be part of the record, is the issues we had between the 3 items, between zoning and the survey map and the land use plan. She made a comment that the zoning designation has more weight than the other 2 items. And I think it's important that be clarified in there that of all those issues we were talking about, that kind of zoning holds the trump on that. And if I misstate that, you tell me.
No, it's accurate. If you have IPS zoning, for instance, you are entitled today to come here and ask for the uses by right, the uses by conditional grant, if you are zoned IPS, regardless of what your land use designation is. So that's.
Yeah, so that wasn't in the notes, I thought we should have that in there somewhere.
So
perhaps
work
under
it
the section.
somewhere.
Yeah, somewhere under the area where we were talking about the zoning, I think it would be appropriate.
Okay, and then I do wanna say, we were notified, from a resident that in the citizen comments, Kathy Herzik of Sussex is actually Kathy Korn, so I have updated that.
On page 5, the middle of page 5, it does say, the plan or necessity standard zoning takes precedence. as far as
Did I miss that?
One paragraph down. Right in the middle of the page, on page 5.
All right, my mistake, sorry, thank you.
So you make a motion to approve?
Make a motion to ignore me?
Second.
That's
That's it?
It was a good catch.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was looking for
Are
it.
there any
too.
other questions or comments other than the one that Jackie made?
Make a motion to approve with the one name correction.
Second?
Further questions, comments? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Then it's ordered by approved. I think what we're going to do, I'd like to drop down to new business. We'll come back to the old business. Review, discussion, and possible approval of the building site and operational plans proposed by Summit Credit Union, NCO Greg Polochek of Summit and Austin Conrad of Strain as architect to construct a 3,720 square foot, 1-story financial institution building and including drive-through, remote teller, and ATM facilities on lot 4 of the Shopset Meadow Ridge PUD development located at the 1468 Chapel Drive. The property is Zone B1 PUD Community Business Plan Unit Development. Mary, bring us back.
Sure. Jump over to that one real quick. Oh, sure.
It's on.
Commissioners will recall having seen this almost a year and 2 months ago. Very similar, slightly larger footprint, based only on minor modifications to the north and south west corners of the building, basically. 3,500 square feet of bank space was pre-approved as part of the PUD for this specific site. What they're talking about tonight is 3,720 square feet. It is, in my opinion, consistent with the spirit and intent of that pre-approval that was granted. Architecturally, we know that it's unique. It is very similar to the plan that was approved by the commission last year. The disparities would, in my opinion, exist principally in that south building wall, where they are planning to go away now from a rooftop, or a non-rooftop HVAC system. It's a VRF system would have been the plan, which means there's nothing visible on the rooftop, so nothing to screen, basically. Now on the south side, I'm concerned for the full-size HVAC that they will be using. There's the addition of a steel parapet. The only issue I raised there, and I say it later in the report, is that brings that elevation to a point where it's not necessarily consistent with that architectural requirement that the principal building materials be glass, stone, brick, and so forth. So overall, in last year's plan, and overall in the 4 elevations combined of this plan, they do meet the architectural requirements. The roof lines are consistent with what was previously approved, and I think an argument could be made that they're consistent with the non-gabled character of the other lots in this development. So I don't raise any issues with that. I just point out those disparities. They do have the material samples in color here for you to look at tonight. That's really all I wanted to point out with respect to the building design. The architecture, the landscaping is thorough. It's appropriately placed in terms of scale and whatnot. They do have a plan included for the dumpster enclosure. It's consistent with the building materials and the balance of dumpster enclosures that are already installed along the parking area in the development. I really only raised a couple of points for, the lighting plan was also reviewed. Fixtures are compliant, the dispersion plan is compliant. I raised just that condition that I would recommend you consider attaching if you're inclined toward an approval tonight, that the HVAC, utility appurtenance, secondary power equipment, anything of that sort that will come to bear on the site as the project details cream up a bit, leading toward building permit, that those things be required to be screened, and that screening plan be reviewed by staff prior to the issuance of the building permit. And then secondly, that the building permit sign, any other permits required for the project would be secured by the applicant in advance of the issuance of the permits for those construction items.
Tim, you had comments?
Yeah, in essence, the site plan didn't change much. They tweaked the drainage around the site a little bit, just changed where some of the flows went, but basically it does flow to storm sewer, which is captured and taken to stormwater ponds on the site that are previously constructed for the entire site. So from a stormwater standpoint, it's acceptable in grading. It's very similar to what the grades were on the original plan, original development plan. And then sanitary and water laterals locations have changed, but they are consistent with where the laterals were placed as part of the original construction on site. So everything is is in order on those items.
Any questions or comments from the?
My only concern with it, I mean, because it is very consistent with what we approved last year, goes to the material for the main roof. I mean, what we've had in the past, what's really existing that's consistent in One Capital is that metal roofing is for ornamental or accessory, not for the main roof. I mean, consider what we had Quick Trip do, because I mean, their brand was even just green metal roofs, and we required them to do asphalt. That's a pretty dominant roof line there. And to me, it does not, you know, I don't know, Mary, from a technical aspect, if that's within our ordinance and codes, but to me, it's certainly not the standard we've held every other business up along Capitol Drive on.
Any other comments?
I guess in regards to the metal roof, I remember this being a hot topic last year when this came in front of us. And I think the general consensus, not everyone, but due to the placement on Capitol being farther down near while the Atlanta mortgage business is technically city, it's very similar design and similar materials, as well as that being bookend on the other side with the Associated Bank having a full metal roof as well, whereas the Quick Trip is based more in the neighborhood district. This area in Capitol and the concessions that they made from where this design started to where we're at now was a large step in the right direction. So while yes, I agree with Craig that the metal roofs were more for ornamental, I feel like this is more consistent with that segment of Capitol Drive as is, and where we kind of started to go with that portion of the retail and commercial, so I have no issues with it.
Joe?
That's exactly how I remember the conversation as well, and I understand what Greg is saying, and I was a big voice trying to change this roof line and trying to get a more conventional building, but we've lost that argument, we're past all that, we approved this sort of modern design, and I don't think asphalt would look right on this building the way it's currently designed, even if you were to force it, it fits with the design of the building, and we're, pretty far down in discussions now with a pre-approval, so I would have no problem with it at this point, although I share your opinion.
Any other comments? I have a couple. First off is the pillars on the drive-throughs. When you look at them, there's two different designs.
Right, so this is, we brought the drawing from the year.
No, I'm talking about the drive-through,
So
the concrete going all the way up.
Yeah, so the drawings that we showed you a year ago were this and this. And the drawings that are being submitted for approval are this and this. And so, this is exactly what we showed you a year ago, and you
Okay.
requested us to raise them. And, and that was done administratively. And so as a result, that's what we're showing you today, the raised ones.
Okay,
So
so
this
this
is
is
what-
up almost to the top.
Right, so this is what we are submitting for approval today.
Oh,
So
okay.
these are just for historical kind of verification, right?
I asked that same question, Jeff, and if you look at the bottom right picture on the left board, bottom right picture on the left board,
Bottom right, okay.
you're looking at the drive-through from the south, and you can see that because of the angle of that drive-through canopy,
Mm-hmm,
that they are keeping that brick height consistent
mm-hmm,
across the steps.
right.
So there's
I was just,
painted column for the same height through each of the three columns.
right, I was just looking at both
Yeah.
of them and saying, well,
Yeah.
which one are you building?
This is-
I was confused too.
It's that one.
Yep.
That was a year ago. This is today.
Okay, now, to the roof, I remember the conversation, and I remember not really being thrilled with it. But if you look at the old design, it's a dark roof. Now you're going with a light roof. I like the dark.
Well, that was my question
It's
too.
the
but
same
you had it
color
listed-
spec.
Yeah, you had it listed the same in the drawing.
It was just a challenge of the rendering.
Okay, I had that same same question, because I was like, I like the darker color, then I looked and was like, it has the same
Yeah.
color listed in the actual print of it.
Oh, okay.
Is that the actual roof right there?
No, that's the color of the roof. This is the wall, the profile of the wall.
Okay, so like
And
at the south
color is
elevation,
solar
that's what we,
metallic, yeah, it matches the metal panel.
okay.
So it's just one metal panel.
Are all the windows gonna be that dark color, is that?
Yeah, it's a gray tinted glass,
Okay.
basically. It's kind of a medium gray, not too dark, not too light. Yeah,
They're all
pretty
clear
standard.
view windows, with the exception of two small windows that you view from the west, on the very north and the very south corners of the west elevation.
Okay.
Otherwise, they're all clear view.
Yeah. I wasn't here for the quick trip conversation, but
Yeah.
I do agree with, I mean, I hear what you're saying, Craig, but I also think that they are kind of, in my opinion, just two separate kind of districts. So this is certainly way more on the spectrum of modern, you know, that I think we've seen, but I do look at those businesses down there, part of the business, and then, you know, quick trip being a little bit here. So,
I guess my question is, what is the color of the roof? Is it that light gray?
I can show you
Yes.
the image if it didn't get in your packets.
You said the color is consistent with the wall?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
Light gray.
That's
Yeah.
gonna be really glaring coming down the road. And I know everybody's kind of going to the metal roof design, but I think we need to, on that area, if we're gonna allow a metal roof, it should be more toned down than.
It's a matte finish, correct?
This is an image
Yeah.
of the roofing itself.
Yeah, we can't,
That's in the scheme.
Different building.
Same material.
you have this in Madison, correct?
Yeah,
Yes.
no, they
Yeah, I
don't
did see
show
the
the
one in
same,
Madison, and it really sticks out.
because of the printing.
We opened in Waukesha.
They are.
On
They
which
are.
one?
It's
We
the
opened
plan
in
different.
Waukesha on Lawrence Boulevard on
It's,
Monday.
it's,
Which one is that? The 18th.
light gray standing seam metal.
I understand that, but just, now let's get a
The
sample.
board with all the time.
Anything up here, anything on paper, and other renderings are not.
But this is the exact color, right?
Well, okay, why don't you hold that up so that they can see it rather than pointing it
So then it's not a darker image.
and walking around.
Yeah, that's the lighter one.
And that's exactly what we have.
So it's
at
really
the
obvious.
branch in Sonoma.
But it's called
Well, it
the
doesn't matter
same
what's
thing
called.
as the dark
I
one.
would like, I don't mind the gray, if we're gonna have to deal with the gray, I would like it toned down,
A little darker.
darker, with the lighter on the thing. I agree with Roberts that, I'd like to see a different roof up there, but I know we approved the other one last year. Not real thrilled with that idea, but if we're gonna put that up there, I would much rather have a darker.
It's a new day, it's new year, we can go, anything a little different, we don't have to vote what we voted last year.
I'm
Yeah,
not, we beat that, I mean, we beat that pretty well last year. We're not gonna go back on, I would not feel comfortable even thinking about going back on that design element of it, cause it's so ingrained in their branding for now, a year down the road to say, actually,
Yeah.
I would not feel good doing
The
that.
rendering we approved had that darker roof.
Okay, so we can see what the perspective on tone for the metal.
It's a printer situation with the rendering, it's labeled the same material, and our intent is to put the
Right,
same
I
material that was
don't think we
approved.
saw samples last year, if I
So the
remember.
rendering is somewhat misleading.
The
The darker rendering is misleading
But this
because
is the
the beam
perspective.
attached to it is a light gray material.
Right, but this is the perspective that was presented last year. And it does show,
You barely see the roof on that.
right, it does show that, the roof
Yeah, the
rendering.
picture's so much lighter.
So if we go down the whole path of changing the color of the roof, does that change all of the stuff on the side? So like, that south elevation, that graded wall, kind of right in the middle, like that
that would also have to change, right?
And we're also going with a lighter brick color here. We did change the brick color per the commission's wishes.
Right.
It's, the color up there is our standard brick. In this case, we're going with a lighter brick.
It's more than the rendering, because this is part of the packet, it was previous, new. It was just the rendering, the printer would print the same.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you're right, the names are the same, but why would the colors be different?
Basically, that was, I mean, with that pulling through, that's exactly what we presented to you a year ago.
Right.
That was, and you can see it's just the perspective, you shoot the perspective of that same model. This is what happened.
You seem to be pushing back on the color. How difficult would it be to get a darker gray?
Well, it would be a deviation from, yet another deviation from the sun.
I just don't wanna end up with the, blue roof. Where people say, what the heck did you guys approve of this kind of problem?
And is it, this grade that we're seeing there and the grade that you're presenting is the same grade that you have on all your other buildings?
Yeah.
And I've driven past other Summit credit unions, especially the one in Madison that's very prominently displayed, and it's never been, I mean, personally, I've never driven past and gone, oh, look at that roof, like, it's just another building. You actually notice the glass and the brick more than you notice the metal features of these buildings, because the glass is so I mean, when you look at this, the glass is the number one focal point of this. And I think even, you know, I'm absolutely inclined to say, yes, go ahead, let's approve it. I wanna make a motion to approve this because it's one of those where, like I said, I've seen their other buildings and it hasn't been an issue, but that's my personal experience with it.
Where is that one in Madison?
Isn't that the one that's right off the Beltline?
Yeah.
Moreland Boulevard.
Moreland Boulevard's just going up. It's brand new.
It opens on Monday.
Yeah.
So you can see it.
Yeah.
It's also on Highway 67 in Oconomowoc.
And you said that was the
And
Mosquito
Babs
ones?
Farms.
Yeah.
Babs Farms was nice,
Yeah.
but they approved it.
So, I mean, it's a design, and I know it's not, the metal is not consistent with us, but like I said, if we're gonna go ahead with the metal, then I see no issue with it because I've seen their other buildings and it hasn't been an issue.
So you made a motion, Jim?
I can, I will make, I mean, unless other people have more questions on it or
Well,
concerns.
we can
but-
still have questions after the motion.
Okay, before so I'll make a motion to approve, item 6A with Mary's recommendations for proper screening of the HVAC
And Tim's?
and Tim's Tim, did you have recommendations as well?
Yeah, just to approve the updated plans.
Oh,
Dated,
okay.
whatever is dated there,
The slight change of the drainage and all?
yeah.
Okay.
Plans that were dated, not a lot.
10/4/19.
Yeah, 10/4/19.
Okay, make a motion to approve item 6A with, the planner and engineer's recommendations.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a
When paper
motion.
decision.
We have a
I will
motion
second
and a
that.
second, are there further comments? I just, my comment would be is, I'm still not happy with the silver or light gray. I'd much rather see it a little darker gray. I think we're opening up a can of worms here because we don't know what's gonna go next to them. And that's gonna be a challenging building because right next door, we put through Chick-fil-A through hell to get their building the way we wanted it. And here we're just
We
pretty
put that
much,
in your house.
I know we approved that, but when we saw the two different, and now that we see what the color is, how light it is, to me, that looks, I don't like it. I just won't. I think it's gonna become a blue up building where residents are gonna complain for that area. So with that, does anybody else have any comments?
We've already had a second to the motion.
I know.
Doesn't that go right to a vote?
No, I can have some more comments. I'm,
Last time after you seconded it on the tabling of it, we weren't allowed to make any more questions or comments.
No, it's not a
Yes.
tabled issue. It's just a
Put it on
motion.
the table.
It's a
You
motion, the motion is.
You made a motion.
A table is different.
Before you ask for a vote, you can ask for additional comments or questions, which is what's happening now, so that's acceptable.
This is the plan that was reviewed and approved last year. Okay.
No, it's the same.
Joey, you have a comment?
No, I was just gonna say that there's a disparity right here, that you pointed out and so forth. I think the building looks better, to be honest with you, with a darker roof. You know, that's an aesthetic thing, but the labeling clearly is the same as far as, but we didn't have the materials.
That's right, we did not have the material last year.
Did you go to Mary just then?
She showed a picture of the drawing.
Of the one we approved last time?
Right.
Which is the lighter color? Yes.
No, I'm just looking at what's in the package today.
Today, yes, but a year ago, we approved the lighter color.
They showed those formerly approved renderings there, kind of as a courtesy to help you understand any differences in the architecture. I don't think they intended to convey any message about roof color by providing those renderings.
We were trying to show you that we complied with your recommendations from the last approval, and we took those into consideration this time.
So the only thing you were being asked to take action on are the new plans, which are color-wise consistent with last year's plans.
Could we approve everything but the roof color and then ask for different samples of the gray colors of the roof be provided like at the next meeting?
They already said that if they change the color of the roof, they'd have to change.
The roof matches all the metal.
It's all uniform.
It's called no.
Sounds like a no.
So, we have a motion and a second for any other discussion. I'll do a roll call on this one, please.
Commissioner Eric Rogers,
Aye.
Commissioner Joe Zampa,
Aye.
I'm sorry,
Yes.
Commissioner Jim Grabowski,
Aye.
Commissioner Cheryl Mans,
Aye.
Commissioner Ryan Lane,
Aye.
Trustee Craig Roberts,
Aye.
President Jeff Knudsen.
No. Your motion
Motion carries.
passes. Okay, item 6B,
Thank you very much.
Aren't you guys still in for 6 weeks?
review, discussion, and possible approval of the sign code waiver request by Summit again, seeking approval to place wall signs which exceed by quantity and size the specific wall sign code limits. Any monument sign which exceeds the height and setback limits set forth by code. Such signage being proposed in support of the prospective financial institution building project on lot 4 of the Shops and Meadow Ridge PUD development located at 1468 Capitol Drive. The property is zoned B1 PUD, community business with planned unit development. Mary.
Last year, they asked for one sign code waiver for the project, and it was given. And that is the same as the very first paragraph that I talked about in my report, which is instead of having a single wall sign up to 40 square feet on both of the street-facing building elevations, they're asking to put two signs onto the one west building elevation, which would have combined square footage of 92.5 square feet. One would be 76.5 square feet, one would be 16 square feet in area. The self-explanatory on the building elevations. So that is consistent with what was approved last year. I think that it's their decision that gives them better exposure versus two smaller signs on two separate building walls like they would be allowed under the code. So that's for the commission to make a determination on. And then this year, they're also asking for an exception with respect to a freestanding monument sign. They're allowed a sign that stands up to 10 feet in height. And in this particular case, they're looking for 12.5 feet in height to the highest point on the monument. The sign area within that monument is still the same, it's still 26.5 square feet, where you're allowed 50 square feet of signage in your monument. So they're well within the area limit, and the size of the structure that holds the sign, we don't regulate, except as to height. So there would be an exception, for the overall height now. What it does, it doesn't raise the size of their sign, but it raises the lowest point of their lettering a little bit higher up, so that people driving by on Capitol, see it at a slightly higher level by about a foot. The other exception that you would be asked to grant as far as a monument sign goes is that it's got sort of a cant to its design. So the footprint of the sign sits at the 10-foot setback from Capitol Drive, but the furthest projecting point of it would hang over into the offset. So it's a fine line, and it's one that I'm gonna let the planning commission make an assessment on. It's roughly 2.5 feet into the offset, or into the setback area. I'll tell you that typically with respect to home construction, when they calculate the setback, if you have 2 foot or less overhangs on your house, they'll use the wall of the house as the basis for measuring your setback. If you're more than 2 feet, typically they'll consider that to be an excessive architectural feature that qualifies as setback measurement, for the setback measurement. So with that information in mind, I'll turn the deliberation over to the commission.
Do you have an example of that sign?
Yeah. No, we did not bring this.
I'm trying to picture what, you good at drawing? I mean, just a really rough draft, I can't even picture what you're talking about, to be honest with you.
Did we not get the signs in here?
I didn't, unless I'm sorry if I missed it.
Yeah. Here, they're in there. There you go. You know, it was all tucked into the packet together.
Oh.
So it's near the back of the
That's
sign.
kind of what I was picturing, I'll pass this around, guys. So Mary, just so I understand, you're saying this little peak is going essentially 2.5 feet kind of over this limit, or what we
We
recommend?
had some elevation challenges with the site, that was part of it. We were blocked from coming from the east, so
Okay.
that's part of it. And then we also lost the position on the monument sign for the development.
Okay.
Originally, there was going to be a development monument sign,
Yeah.
and then that went by the wayside, and we were supposed to have a panel on that.
And then this is essentially, the bottom of these letters is essentially being requested to be a foot higher.
Well, the overall height of the sign, so last year's sign was 10 feet tall
Okay.
to the highest point.
This is
This
12.
one you see is 12.5 feet
Yeah,
tall to the
okay.
highest point. And by doing that, they move the bottom line of their lettering up a foot and a half.
We're allowed to have it on the east side, but it doesn't really.
It's a very last page of the package for 6.
So the sign is for the few people that don't miss this iconic building. I just wanna be sure what we're doing.
Is it, looking at the drawing here, is it really that big of a deal to slide the monument back 2.5 feet? What's that?
We can slide it back.
I see that being a non-issue, because that at least eliminates the, saying the precedence of people cantilevering out over the property line or what have you, so.
Simple fix.
And so they're good in terms of the square footage, and so it's just the offset, or the setback on that.
So if they slide it back, there's no or setback waiver. They're still at 12.5 feet, where 10 feet is the overall height limit.
How does the elevation of this, the base of the sign compare to the elevation of Capitol Drive? Are you above Capitol Drive or below?
You're pretty much at grade at that point.
We're pretty much at grade, but there is a ditch. That's.
I know there's a ditch, quite a bit.
You'll be on the other side of the ditch.
Yes.
How
Yeah, go
close
ahead.
to the building, between the ditch and the building? Distance.
It's between, the ditch is between the sign and the street, not between the sign and the building. You can share that.
Great. Setbacks.
So you're looking for,
Right.
so the sign is here.
And I believe it's a 25 or 35 foot right away.
Yeah, it's gonna be hard back.
10 feet away from the
So
road.
you're signing that to the.
And the ditch is right in here? Okay.
Joe, you have something?
My question is, Mayor, so implicit in our approval would be that they're forfeiting the ability to put that second sign that they could have.
Right.
That's clear, okay, that,
Yeah.
I would be okay with it.
I didn't note those conditions that I had recommended, that would be among them, as well as the decision about moving the sign back versus cantilevering it over, and then just the requirement to secure permits.
Then I would give you a motion to approve it with those two provisions.
I second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is hereby adopted.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we're gonna end this here.
Okay, we're gonna go back to item 5A, old business, review, discussion, and possible recommendation to village board regarding zoning code. Language change to chapter 40, article 6, division 3 through 7, pertaining to construction of garages, accessory storage building, structures, and possible establishment of real estate requirements related to detached garages, single-family residential zoning district. Mary?
I wish that the fellow who spoke in the public hearing would have comment on. I do recall him talking a couple of times, one very recently, about the R5 district. I sent him the definition, in fact, for height with respect to accessory buildings. The way height is calculated on an accessory building is from grade at the front wall of the building to the highest point on the peak of the building. So it's not calculated from the street. So if you're sitting, your lot's sitting way up here and your street's way down here, you don't start your grade or your height measurement from here. You start it at the front edge of the building, so it's 15 feet tall from where you built it.
I think the point he was making though is if you're measuring from the front of the building and the slope continues up through the building, then the rear of the building could be, have to be dug into the side of the hill.
Yeah, well, I think if you had a pretty severe
It would have to be a
incline.
steep incline.
Yeah, yeah. So, just to clarify that. Also, the first planning commission review on this topic was actually not oriented toward opening up the door and providing for the construction of detached garages on all lots. It was just about the opposite. The idea was, on the heels of the buyer's detached garage being built before the house plan was approved with an attached garage. On the heels of that, the village president had asked that we come back around and talk about taking away the privilege for detached garages, period. But that shifted as the commission talked it through, and the decision was made to send staff back to look at revising the R5, all of the residential districts, but using the R5 as the example, to revise that language and allow for detached garages in all cases, which was a very unexpected turn of discussion. So knee-jerk reaction from staff really wasn't available there. So back to the drawing table and you sit through that idea, and it raises some issues. So what you have in front of you tonight is a red line version of our 5 district, for example, that touches on the changes that I think you were asking to be made by the end of the last discussion on this item. Under paragraph 1, private garages, carports, etc., subsection A. Now it would read, all new residential home construction shall include at least one enclosed garage structure. And now I've added this language. So we've taken out the attached, so you're now no longer required to have an attached garage at all. You just need to have an enclosed garage structure, okay? It can't be less than 576 square feet in area. Where did I come up with that number? That is the minimum size essentially for a contemporary 2-stall garage. It allows for people with SUVs and large pickup trucks to park in a 24 by 24 foot garage, okay? So at a minimum, 576 square feet, 2-stall garage. And then goes on to say, no detached garage structure may exceed 900 square feet in area, and there shall be no more than one detached garage structure per lot. Okay? So we've kind of shifted course here and said attached garages are not required. An enclosed garage structure for all properties, for all principal residences, is required. Has to be at least 576, can't be more than 900. Okay? So beneath.
Can an attached garage be more than 900?
Yes, and it's an interesting point, because I did look around at other communities' codes, and there are limitations. We've never had a limit in our code about attached garages and how large they can be. Other communities do. Some of them regulate it by width. It can't be more than 50% of the width of the principal residence it's attached to. Others regulate by can't exceed 1,000 square feet. So there's a couple of different permutations about how or if to handle the maximum size of an attached garage. And if the commission wants to introduce something like that, this would be a good time to discuss it. So in the next paragraph, what I ask is, all detached garages should have direct or paved driveway access from a designated adjacent public or private road or alleyway. I'm asking the question as much as I'm providing the stimulus here. Was it the commission's intention that all properties be permitted a detached garage and they aren't required to be associated with a driveway? Not required to have, secondary access off or access off of a secondary street? Can it just be a garage that's built out in the backyard, surrounded by grass? Or maybe it's just, and the reason I think about that is I think maybe these are just gonna be, backyard party barns. And you just extend the pavement, out from your patio door to the front doors of the garage. We do have a definition in our code of garages, and they are intended for principally the use of storing the motor vehicles of the people residing on the premises. So a garage is defined, but we aren't gonna police what it's actually used for. I mean, if you've got an overhead door in a 900 square foot building, that looks like a garage to me, right? So that's something that you could require, that driveway access, and it could be paved, it could be whatever the commission might want to do with that, but I think it's worth having a discussion about that tonight to find out what you may have intended or not intended by all residential cases. So then moving on, we're retaining that provision for properties with 2.5 acres or more. that they also can be permitted a detached garage in excess of 900 square feet if it's granted a conditional use grant approval by the planning commission. So they can make that request. Otherwise, they are like everyone else that can have up to 900 square feet detached garage and an accessory storage structure. So one accessory storage structure is still permitted, and that is distinguished from a garage by the definition of a garage, and by the fact that it can't exceed 192 square feet in the area. Okay. Then flipping over onto section 40.205.5, that's another one where I'm kind of raising the question to feel the commission out about the issue that I could see evolving here, and that is if we allow the construction of a detached garage out in the backyard and we require the paving of a driveway to get there, are we going to run into a situation where we've got very little open space, green open space, left on some residential properties? In fact, the question was posed to us about a year ago by an individual who's got a property down on Park Avenue where he would have liked to pave essentially his entire backyard. And we have nothing that prohibits that. The review that got triggered was on the question of, will this create adverse impacts with respect to drainage on neighboring properties? And the solution, the only solution he could arrive at that would be accepted by the village engineer was too expensive for him to go through with the project. So it didn't happen, but we don't have any minimum green space requirement in our residential districts. Some communities do, many don't.
We have it in our commercial district.
We have one in our commercial districts, yeah, 30%.
30%.
Right. So that is something to take into account, especially if we're gonna go that, like I said, the extra step of driveway access, paved access to the garages.
What about just the question of not making it have to be paved? Would that help any drainage if you just said it would be
Well,
gravel?
you run into uneven gravel, when hard packed gravel will act just like a hard surface asphalt or concrete driveway for the most part. Once it's hard packed, I mean, if it was loose, open graded, which is very hard to drive on, open graded stone that can get into can soak in, can get underneath, and get into the groundwater, that would be great, but you can't drive on that very easily. So that's the problem, you run into, gravel is open space or green, it's good for drainage, but it really doesn't help that much.
As someone that neighbors a property that snuck one past the village and paved about 93% of their green space, and my lawn floods every time it rains, we definitely will put a ratio in here.
Yeah. I'm fine with that,
Yeah, it would be asinine to not have a green space requirement in a residential area.
I would also like to see that we would require paved driveways. How many, and there's some in the village here where they have the gravel driveways, if they don't keep them up, when it starts looking like you get the weeds going through, they don't put enough gravel, they just start looking like crap. And especially some of these neighborhoods that really can detract from
But
what we would like properties.
any existing situations would be grandfathered, I assume, or would they be compelled to,
It would be grandfathered.
yeah.
If we don't currently have something in the code, it could be in a different chapter that I don't work with usually. If we don't already have something in there requiring a hard surface driveway, they would be legal non-conforming.
And a hard packed gravel would not be acceptable in that? Are we talking just access road, or are we talking strictly impermeable concrete asphalt?
Well, what Tim was saying is that hard packed gravel, which it becomes after a year or so of use, treats water the same way that concrete does.
Correct,
It runs off.
but getting back to Cheryl's point where she said she would want to require paving, I think that's.
Paving is
Is expensive.
pretty routine standard though for residential
Right.
neighborhoods.
Right.
You get dust issues.
So paving means concrete or asphalt, right?
Yeah, you get your poor maintenance issues that end up having ruddy, tracking onto the streets. You do get some adverse impacts from that.
Other people could use pavers if they wanted to, or, you know, put concrete a certain distance and then have pavers further to the back, you know, paving blocks of some sort that can drain some of the water away. But that gets a little expensive to construct as well, so.
But it sounded to me like it was a larger question that Mary brought up, was do we require the driveway access as part of the definition of the garage before we even get to the services? Are we going down that road?
Yeah,
That's what it sounds like.
that makes sense.
Sounds like that's what.
Well, I think we should, because then it addresses, it's not a week, but it addresses my question last time, which is, when does the shed become a garage?
Right.
And if you have a garage in your backyard, you say, well, it's a garage, but there's no access to it, is it really a garage? So I think we do need that in there, and that's obviously separate from the open space ratio, because you're talking about permeable when you say that, correct?
Right.
Okay, so
But
what
I
would
talk
you
about
recommend as a
open space.
percentage? I mean, you do 30% on commercial, but most residential lots have a lot more green space than 30%, so what would you say is an appropriate ratio for residential?
I actually think 30%, this is the conclusion I kind of came to, anticipating that question. I looked at Cedarburg, for instance, and they do have a 30% open space requirement, and they have very small lot sizes, similar to our R5 district. But as you step up out of the R5, the minimum lot size requirement is 10,500. And you get into the R1 where it's an acre, R2 is a half acre, R3 is like 15,000. R4 is pretty small. It's 12,000. Maybe there should be a tier requirement that gets a little more demanding the larger the lot sizes become. Exactly what those numbers should be, I guess I wanted to hear kind of the commission's vibe on the topic before, trying to set something down for you.
Could you take a stab at tiering and come back with us with some kind of a recommendation on tiering?
Yeah, I mean.
I don't even have a feeling how many
Yeah.
tiers we would need.
Right, if it's your desire to implement an open space requirement, I would like to dig deeper into that
Okay.
and give you some kind of specific recommendation and what it's based on.
I'd like to see that before we make a decision.
And as the gentleman who spoke here about the lake over, or the overlay for, Park Ave and all that, obviously, most of those being non-conforming, that's just another element that can be granted a conditional, correct? 'Cause like the
Setbacks and offsets can be.
I mean, like the green space of 30%, because if you're building on the north side of Park Ave, there's some lots that you can't have 30%, because there's just
Enough space.
You have to address the situation where they're already at less than 30%.
Right.
And how you're gonna accommodate that into the,
Okay.
kind of into the whole calculation.
Well, again, they would be grandfathered, presumably.
I mean, usually they
Right.
come in, just like this gentleman that we had to deal with. He came in, he wanted to add to his property, which he probably would have ended up with probably, well, he had some in the front yard, but maybe, he probably wouldn't have had any more than 20%. With his, so he would have been denied immediately because he wouldn't have gotten the 30%. Or maybe he was close to, maybe he met the 30%, but then he wanted to put in, a garage, like a larger garage. So there's really two issues with him, we would have ran into two issues. One is the amount of open space, and then the second one would have been the drainage issues that would be created from that situation.
So it sounds like we answered the question. I hear everyone saying, yes, we should have some sort of paved pathway to the garage.
Because
So
of the-
I'm gonna ask right on top of that, is there a width standard that you wanna apply?
Has to at least be a single car wide.
I don't know what the average, single car drive.
9
But
feet,
is that
driving
10?
lane is 9 feet.
9 or 10?
I'd say no less than 9 feet.
Yeah.
I was gonna say 10, right?
I thought it was 10.
I defer to Tim, he's
Yeah.
much better at that stuff.
minimum area.
I mean, yeah,
I'd like to see some type of maximum. What comes to mind, past Butler and a couple blocks, when you're going to the pizza restaurant,
talking about those no good Glacier
Brennan's-
Road people.
the house and the 7-car garage, I do not think we want something like that necessarily, something you brought up.
They still have
about-
to deal with setbacks and things
Right.
too, so in the R5, where these are small lots, I mean, if they want a 20-foot wide,
It's not.
they'll tear down their house.
Right.
But I'd like to see some maximum, and then again, they can come before.
Sure,
Or if
there's
they
so
want-
many unique
Are
circumstances.
are you suggesting a size on detached also?
We're
Yes.
talking about the driveway.
Yes,
So,
both.
so that's
Both.
a new addition then if we're gonna do that.
I'd like to see both, because I can think of collectors of vehicles that have 5, 6, 7, 8 cars that would love to build a garage that big, and I don't
Well,
necessarily.
Mary pointed out there's a couple of ways to go at that, and maybe we gotta look at the recommendations, whether it's a percentage of perspective width, or it's gonna be a set amount of width in itself, but there's a couple of ways to go at it, but.
I'd like to see something like that.
And as far as green space, 30%, you said, Mary, would be,
30% is a number that,
This is
Peterborough,
something
for
else.
instance, uses. as a
is everybody
requirement
okay with
space in their-
30%?
Well,
She's gonna work
But
up
then
tier-
go up.
She's gonna work up the tier for us and come
Yeah,
back with a
okay.
recommendation.
For the 1 acre lot, I could see 50% or more.
Right, yeah, exactly, 30% on a 1 acre lot's a lot of,
That's a lot of concrete.
concrete.
The only thing I would throw in there, like, do we need to have any sort of language about timeline, how soon after the garage is built? Does the driveway have to be put in?
Hey, slow down, sometimes it takes a while to build a garage.
I've seen it.
I think especially we should accelerate that timeline.
But I'm saying, like,
Slow down.
if that's not important, then that's fine, but like, if we put it in there, but there's no language speaking to timeline, they say,
Well-
oh, we're working on it, it might be 5 years down the road that they finally get to it.
Covenants by somebody,
Well,
yes, a year.
I mean, the permit is, the building permit's 1 year, and to get your final on it, you have to have access to the garage. So,
So maybe just some sort of sentence or two that states
You gotta
that.
be careful, because if someone builds it, let's say they were building it now, because if people are building now,
Grounds.
you can't make them not have occupancy without, until they have it paved, because they can't pave it right now.
in the winter, yeah.
So you could say maybe, a year is
Yeah.
typically a reasonable.
Year or 18 months even.
Yeah, that might
Give
be
an
a little
administrative
high.
Well,
settle.
the year gives you through a summer season.
Weather conditions.
Yeah, we don't have to be tight, I was just thinking about that part of it, maybe being an area where people can just
I
drive
agree,
for a
otherwise,
long time.
if there's nothing in there, it won't go on, it won't ever get done.
Right.
Paving within 60 days, exceptions at the administrator's discretion.
I'm actually just curious, it probably has nothing to do with this. How many properties down here like have an existing detached garage less than 576 square feet?
I used to, I tore it
How
down.
many have that?
I'm just wondering, like, if there's a scenario where there's an old garage down the street that's 480 square feet, are they allowed to rebuild that at 480 square feet under this?
On the same footprint.
No, if you tear your garage down,
It's got it now.
subject to the new
Okay,
standards.
I'm just curious.
But if it's blown down, or if there's a fire, or, something like that, then you can build exactly the way that was.
Okay. So get the big animal over there. Okay.
So Mary, everything that you've given us here deals specifically with the R5. Do we need to go through this exercise on the other Rs?
Yeah, whatever you do here will upload into all the other Rs. So there's one more,
Yeah, green space percentage of the
there's two more modifications just to touch on. And one of them is something Mr. Rommel brought up. Under 40.207 on the second page there, the height of the accessory structures shall not exceed 15 feet. I crossed out, or the width of the structure, whichever is less. That's the way the code used to read, or reads now. Maximum height 15 feet, or the width of the structure, whichever is less. So if you have a 24-foot wide, 2-stall detached garage, you would have been limited to 15 feet. I was suggesting that we get rid of whichever is less.
It's fine.
Yeah. Sounds good.
So it does still stand then at 15 feet, which was his concern. Should we,
But this would only apply if the structure was less than 15 feet wide, say it was 12 feet wide, a one-car garage. Then you're saying that the height could only be 12 feet.
Previously.
If we did, didn't delete that last phrase.
yeah.
Yeah, 15 feet is.
That one makes sense.
And then on the very last page,
Oh, Mary, before you go from that, when you're talking building height, 40.207, height of accessory structure, not 15, maybe I'm misunderstanding something here, but accessory is not the garage, it's another building, correct? Because in the
Yeah.
front part here, you use accessory as an extra structure besides the garage.
Right.
you're right. Yeah, so that really should say, the height of accessory structures including detached garages.
No, I think we need to leave that up, because I need my garage higher, so.
No.
Should have mentioned it. Yeah, I shouldn't have said it.
Is it paved? Yeah, see, that's just it.
Well, we have a definition now, so.
Yeah, but.
The principal structure would be the dwelling, the accessory structure would be any other structure on the property.
Any
Any other structure.
That's what that's all,
Yeah.
that's what I was
Defined it.
Yeah.
What's
I would-
that?
Accessory is anything other than the primary home.
Because it lists
Right.
dwelling,
Oh.
then it's anything other than the
Yeah, I
primary.
thought it was,
It
In
could go
fact-
to-
because there's accessory as, up here we're using accessory as not something other than the garage. Whereas when you talk about the 2.5 acres, it says here maybe a detached garage or accessory storage building. Or also I took accessory as the storage building, not the garage. So the garage could be higher than 50.
The other thing about it is the garage attached, it's part of the primary structure.
Yeah, but
Accessory structure is something other than that, could be an attached garage, could be a shed.
How about
There's-
saying
there's-
including
there's-
detached garage?
I know there's a home up here by the school that is attached to the house and it's the same height as the house. Because what they did is they put a living quarter over the garage.
Sure.
So the garage is actually 42 feet.
But then it's
Well,
not
then
an
that's,
accessory structure.
that's not an accessory.
It's attached to the house, it's part of the primary
Yeah.
structure.
Yeah.
That would be okay.
But, you know, I've also seen homes where the garages not have the living above.
Well, the
And
buyer's
just the
home,
roof line
the buyer's
goes all the way
home, that would
across.
be just the
It's an
crew.
accessory
Just
structure.
above the garage.
Everything is
Yeah.
an accessory structure, it's not a principal building.
Right,
It's just for.
but I mean, there's some homes that have the roof line going the length and the garage is at the end.
That's correct.
And it's all garage, 42 feet.
It's a primary structure.
So it
So
should be
if I ran so if somebody comes in and says, well, I'm gonna run a tunnel to the garage, I wanna make it the same height as the house.
A breezeway would be better.
A breezeway, yes. So then you could
I
go.
don't think a
42
tunnel's gonna get you.
Okay, but then if they put the breezeway, then you could go 42 feet then, because it's now attached.
No, well, and, so why don't we just say height of accessory structures and detached garages?
That'd be fun.
That's what I jotted down.
Okay, okay, you can go on then, Mary. Sorry, you went over on this one. I just want that clarified, gentlemen, because I really do need to get.
So what are you gonna say is your building permit for it?
I need to put a lift in my garage.
So the last
Before we
section,
discuss it.
just talks about building offsets, and in fact here, all I was doing is suggesting exactly that we say accessory structures and detached garages have the offset of 10 feet. and they're eligible for a request for relief on legal non-conforming lots from those through conditional use. So that's all that change is.
So
Any other questions or comments?
is there have to be a motion on this, or is just?
Maybe the table?
She's gonna come back.
You're coming back with the R5 or the.
Review discussion and recommendations only.
So we need a motion to.
No, we don't need a
Okay.
motion,
Okay.
just recommendations. Any further discussion on item 5A? Okay, then we're gonna move on to item 6C. Review, discussion, and possible recommendation to village board regarding prospective zoning code language changes to enact, among other things possibly, density limitations on housing for the elderly, reference chapter 40, article 6, division 16 of the village code, i.e. the IPS institutional and public service district. Mary, do you want to start this?
This is another request to staff that we dive back in and revisit the IPS zoning district with respect to uses, elderly, housing for the elderly, in nursing homes. There's a little bit of a kind of a word definition there in our current code. And also, the question specifically posed to staff is, could we implement some sort of a density limitation where housing for the elderly is concerned in the IPS district? I think the answer is yes, you can. Exactly what the right answer is, what should that density limit be, and based on what criteria is what we're attempting to answer by starting this conversation. So I gave you kind of a summary of things. I gave you the IPS district marked up with changes that I think as a staff group, we sort of concluded would be a good launching point for this conversation with the commission to feel you out on what the preferences might be. But I'll move further down the report to, I think it's like third or fourth page where I talk about other pertinent information. And this kind of fills in the background for you about what we're dealing with. So the village currently has definitions that relate to this topic. Elderly housing is defined as housing for older persons per the statute, okay? So, or per the Housing Act. So turn to the next page. Right in the middle of the page, you see section 2, definition of housing for older persons. So I want you to understand what that means. It means that it's housing that's intended and operated for occupancy by people 55 and older. It means that only at least 80% of those units have to be occupied by at least one person who's 55 and older. Or the housing facility has to publish and adhere to policies and procedures that demonstrate it was their intent, and is their intent, under this paragraph, to provide housing for those 55 and older. And they have to comply with rules issued by the secretary for verification of that occupancy. Provide verification reliable surveys, include examples of their policies and procedures that affirm that they're intending to be a facility for 55 and older, okay? So that's what our current definition of elderly housing is. We have no definition for home for the aged, but we do have a provision in there, and it says see elderly housing and or nursing home. We don't have a definition anywhere in the code for elderly housing, so that one doesn't apply. But we do have a definition currently for nursing home. And I won't read it to you except to note that what it doesn't say is that provides access to 24-hour nursing care, okay? Our definition doesn't include that. Turn the page and look at the Wisconsin statute's definition of nursing home. It's the very last paragraph. means a place where 5 or more people who aren't related to the operator reside, receive treatment or care because of their mental or physical condition, require access to 24-hour nursing services, et cetera, et cetera. And I cut off whatever nursing home does not include, but for the sake of our conversation, I think this is sufficiently informative. So bearing all of that in mind, the idea was to double back into the IPS district language and revisit what are the permitted uses, the conditional uses specifically. And so on page 3 of the report, we would see that nursing homes would remain in the list as a prospective conditional use, but that it would be heightened in its definition to require that it have access to 24-hour skilled nursing care, but the balance of the definition remains pretty much intact, consistent with our current definition. Okay, so it really just grabs that 24-hour nursing care provision and adds that in. Then we go on to talk about housing for the elderly, which is asterisked under nursing home, okay? Housing for the elderly, asterisk. And now we go on to provide some more specific regulations that would attend only to housing for the elderly. What do we, no, that's good. So we would sort of create these predetermined standards. So if you want to do housing for the elderly, and it's not a nursing home, what density limits might apply to you? And the thought was that housing for the elderly would comply with the following specific regulations in addition to all other provisions of this IPS district. On properties that have, IPS properties that have 50% or more of the adjoining land uses are single-family residential, then you're going to have a density limit of 6 units per acre. Okay. That number is consistent with, I believe it's consistent with our R6 Plex residential maximum density number. Okay, that's where we grabbed it from to try and make sense and to show consistency in our evaluation about what density we consider to be moderate, somewhere between single-family detached and short of multifamily. We consider this moderate density to be 6 units per acre. Okay, that's what we said about our R6 district. Why not say that about our housing for the elderly in IPS?
Mary, how would you apply this kind of thinking to a mixed unit where you've got 3 tiers of care, one being completely independent, which would fall under probably housing for the elderly, and you've got on the far end, you've got, say, a memory unit. How would this density apply to a project like that?
You'd really have to break it down. You'd have to say, all right, what I see here I see 20 units that are exclusively independent living.
Mm-hmm.
So those have and they're intended for 55 and up. So those have a density limit. No, I see what you're saying. If the project is cumulative, like the Capri project, yeah.
Dimensional, yeah.
There you go. Yeah.
I didn't want to mention it because Mark,
Thank you, Joe.
I mentioned a specific project. I was trying to stay generic.
Well, it's out there, everybody knows
There was a
about it.
project like that.
Right.
But how would you apply this?
Hypothetical speaking.
Yeah, you'd have to consider, every unit, every bed, every unit to be, 1 unit. And apply that. So if 50% of the surrounding land use is single-family residential, you're allowed up to 6 units per acre, whether that's a memory care unit, whether that's a full skilled nursing care unit, you'd be limited to those densities, to that density.
But shouldn't you state it in such a way that it makes it clear that that's how we are, in the IPS, that's how it's gonna be?
I think that clarity might not be coming through, crystal clear here.
So you have that limits of the 6 units per acre and the 10 units per acre for the listed here under the housing for the elderly per Wisconsin, statute definitions. It doesn't say it for the skilled nursing or nursing homes that's listed in 7. Are you saying that same density would be applied to that category as well?
That would have been my intention. I don't think that came through very clearly here, though.
Okay. Oh, I guess because it's still under 7, so it'd be, I gotcha.
I guess
Go ahead, Craig. But under 7, you really have 3 different usages, if I'm understanding this right. Nursing home, clinics, and housing for the elderly, those are 3 different things that we're saying are permittable under this, correct? Or are you saying those 3 things are linked?
No, we're saying those 3 things are permissible, period.
Uniquely-
Nursing homes?
Uniquely separate, so elderly housing does not necessarily have to provide medical care.
Right,
Okay, all right.
Could be independent.
right.
So from a density standpoint, then it's how within the development, whatever that development is, it would count each one uniquely, or equally rather. So whether it's independent, assisted, or memory care, a unit is a unit, right?
Yep, even if it's nursing care,
Okay.
yeah.
I'd like the words memory care be included somehow in here too. It seems when they're building these days, they don't call nursing homes anymore, it's always memory care.
Well, nursing is different.
Pretty well.
It is different.
But
It's different.
that's,
It's the highest level.
yeah,
It-
but
it-
that's.
The main part is providing access to 24-hour skilled nursing care. That's the main.
Right.
And memory care is a subset of skilled nursing care.
I think the way that it's written though, and it is complicated to kind of sort through. The idea was that you could entertain a nursing home project that would not have a density limit attached to it.
I'm sorry, can you repeat why? Where did that come from?
I'm just thinking it through. I'm just thinking it
I
through.
thought you said the nursing home, the clinics, and the housing for the elderly, under this style would all fall under the density requirements.
If it's all part of a contiguous development project.
So if the density thing doesn't, well, I'm sorry, I'm missing something, I apologize.
No,
So why wouldn't have a density limit, is what they're saying?
Why wouldn't the
Why
density
wouldn't we?
limit be specifically for independent categories there? You know, nursing, separate development is elderly housing, separate development is, wouldn't they all follow
Right.
the same density requirements?
I guess maybe I raised that more as a feeler for discussion than as an absolute, to recommend to you. Is there a distinction, in use between something that is exclusively a nursing home? Meaning it may serve people under 55, it may serve people over 55. It could serve anybody, it could serve, it could serve
Any form of disability?
drug rehabilitation.
But the issue is not that it's different, the issue is how would it impact surrounding properties?
Right.
And if it is that intensity of use going to impact the surrounding neighborhood, and is it therefore not compatible? So I think that the question then becomes, I think that's where we were trying to say, to look at other multifamily standards and coming up with a density number to say, I'm not sure that these uses in and of themselves are materially different in terms of their impact on other properties. So similar, limits on density probably would make sense.
And I agree that I think we should have something along the lines, because an elderly, housing for the elderly, you could sneak some, we talk about being overpopulated with multifamily. You look at the development that's along Capitol Ave, or Capitol Drive there, that's a senior housing.
Those apartments.
Yeah, that are basically just a giant apartment complex, but, you know, we have a density limitation on multiplex on the residential side. You can sneak one of those past because, hey, there's no density requirements for housing for the elderly now, and now all of a sudden, we have another, 100-unit housing for the elderly that goes up along Capitol Drive. So I think there should absolutely be a density requirements on all of those categories. Anything that has the ability to be a multiplex, we need to start protecting ourselves going that route because we're oversaturated at this point. So it would just, in my opinion, it makes absolute sense to try to close a loophole.
Well, what we might want to do is,
That's the
Yes, we did.
conclusion. We go through these conversations and we continue to kind of, concentrate on it, and I do think that's where we ended up.
Right, so the question is the number.
If the
Right.
building use is pure, and it fits in one of these categories, then I can easily see that we can apply a density, requirement easily. But when the units are mixed, that's when it all gets fuzzy for me. When you've got multiple buildings, different uses spread out over, a particular project, which you're probably already gonna use like a PD or something to control it anyway. I'm trying to see then, how does that play out?
How do you do it?
So there's a variety of ways that you could address that. You could say that the most restrictive applies when you're gonna have a blended development. You could say that if they look at the ratio of the units, and if, whatever the greatest ratio number would be, the largest number of types of units, that's the standard that would apply. There's a lot of different ways I think we could go about doing it, but it's gonna be up to the commission as to what they feel comfortable with.
No, because that's when it gets really.
It does. That's the weeds that you have to sort through.
And are you referring to one that has different levels of care throughout?
They would fit into three categories on
Right.
a piece of property.
You're saying one that has housing for the elderly,
Yeah.
and on that same property is a skilled nursing? So wouldn't they, as the way you have it worded here, wouldn't all those have to abide by the same density requirement regardless of what level of care that is?
well, right now, a unit is a unit.
A unit is a unit. And are you saying that we should look at having different densities per?
I'm trying to understand how we would deal with it,
How
how we calculate.
If you have a building with skilled nursing on the first floor and 3 floors of independent living or
Right.
elderly homes above it, how do you get that
I
ratio?
think a unit is a unit. You gotta keep it equal.
I think 10 units per acre is pretty limiting for a skilled nursing facility.
Because,
Yes,
I think
it is.
Whatever.
Because River Hills, when it was operating, they packed them in there, the rooms were the size of a closet.
Right,
right.
2 beds per room.
Right.
Oh, it was.
Yeah.
Well, and it'd be difficult because, nursing homes do have the fluidity to change designations of beds. You could say, well, we're gonna start with 12 beds of memory care, and then all of a sudden their memory care gets filled up, and they go, well, we'll turn that wing into memory care also. That's just the acuity level of care. Ryan can speak to this from being back in the industry and everything. So if we're gonna, that's why I think just a unit is a unit is a unit, regardless of the level of care it's receiving, because someone that's
I
an
think that's
independent living.
kind of the conclusion we're coming to.
If someone's an independent living that only needs help, but I think according to Wisconsin statutes, under 3 hours a week, and all of a sudden they have a fall, but they wanna stay in their same room, now they're technically in nursing care.
I'm no
So,
problem with
yeah.
I'm no problem with that thinking, but what I'm saying, when you have independent apartments, okay, so there is no nursing care, they're independent apartments, and nursing, and other levels of care within the same property complex, then you're gonna have to apply different density standards, right?
No, I'm saying
But he's saying just
Or not.
apply the same
Apply the
denominator
same
to everything.
to
A
everything.
unit is a unit, whether it's 2 units of nursing care or 2 units of independent living, it's 4 units on that property. Whether they mix it up and do 3 independent.
See, the why
ones
create
skilled-
the categories?
That's a
Why create
good
that?
point. The question is,
Good point.
are they materially different in terms of their impacts on surrounding land uses? And, I guess you could say that if it's, an intensive nursing situation, that's gonna have more staffing, and so, maybe more traffic and so forth as a result. So you could make a logical argument that should be different than just the senior apartments.
But maybe to your point, then that's then maybe that's the floor.
Right.
If the most restrictive is skilled nursing with
Then
requirements,
that's-
then that's where we set the bar, but we still use the unit of measure as units.
Yes.
It's indistinguishable between whether it's
I think that's
independent, elderly, whatever you wanna call it, the unit is the unit, but keep it the most restrictive if you.
Yeah.
I think the reason for qualifying the definition of nursing home, was to make sure that they have, a separate eligibility than housing for the elderly, because not every nursing home can commit to having 55 and older only. A nursing home probably has to keep its window open more broadly than that.
Mark, with this, Brandon area, the way this is written up right now, Joe's point, if somebody came in and said, well, we're gonna put in elderly housing, but we want one centralized building for memory care and nursing home, would they be able to still do that?
Well, I think all this would be saying is how many units are you looking at putting in total? And how many acres do you have, and therefore what is your density then as a consequence?
Well, I'm just thinking, let's just say, I'm trying to think of 10 acres. They're gonna put it on a 10-acre lot out on Capitol Drive somewhere.
Sure.
6 of the acres are gonna be used for this 10 units.
No. The whole property is either surrounded by 50% or more residential, or less than 50% residential.
Well, that's what I'm saying, it's out on Capitol, it's not surrounded by, it's under 50%.
So if they've got 10 acres, using that number, they're allowed 100 units. And they can be
Any mixing.
nursing type units,
Yes.
they can be
That's it.
elderly
Yeah.
housing, independent living
You
units, they
decide,
can be any
let
of
the
those.
market decide.
Okay, but then he can't,
He
they
gets
couldn't
100
do
units.
5 acres of elderly housing and then put a big building in the middle and make that whatever they want.
They can.
Yeah.
100 units, as long as it adds up to 100,
Yep.
they can do whatever they want.
So beds are what you're gonna be
Yes.
looking at.
Yeah.
Well, not beds, what's a
Units.
Units.
A unit is a living area, so they can have 2 beds in a unit, they can have 1 bed in a unit, a unit is a unit, a living quarter.
It's a room.
Yeah.
It's a part.
Living
Well,
space.
it's a nursing home or
Yeah.
Yeah.
But independent living,
Yeah.
a unit
Well-
can have generally 2 people.
I mean, but the state does all their certification requirements off of bed count.
Yeah, I think we would, because
I mean, if we're applying this strictly to
Somewhere else.
nursing care. Right, we're not.
Based on the number of.
No, independent living still goes off of bed count, it's also positive. Assisted living does, skilled nursing does,
Independent
memory care does.
couldn't, because it could be a small apartments. They couldn't go off of that count.
I think it needs to come back.
Because they have 1 bedroom and 2
Yeah.
bedroom apartments.
Right,
Right.
they would still have 2 beds then.
Would hope to have like.
So a 2 bedroom apartment would be 2 units.
Yeah, report committee.
Independent living or private pay, which just basically falls under housing for the
So
elderly.
they can get their arms around it.
Got it.
I don't know if there's state funding.
I just have a quick question.
Sure.
But there is.
Anything that gets. How do we define adjacent and adjoining land? Is that
Yes.
literally right next to it?
Yes.
Touching.
Right over the.
Even if it's
Common
that,
boundary.
even if it's that
Point.
point of contact
Okay.
and everything
So I
else
see.
is obvious.
So we need further clarification on independent living.
Yeah.
Unit.
So that would look at.
Well, that, yeah,
So there were
independent
some
living would
more-
basically be housing for the elderly.
We're struggling with independent living. It could be like a small apartment with 2 bedrooms. And is it counted as 1 unit or 2 units? You know, we're struggling with clarifying some of these terms.
We'll work on sorting that out.
Well,
A unit
housing for the
definition.
elderly
Yep.
can be a condo development that.
That's just 55 and older.
Right.
Right,
I don't know anybody who lives in something like that.
but that's not
Yeah.
called independent living. It's just what
Right, that's what I'm saying, but according to the definition,
Yeah, I think we need to tweak some of this language.
Mary, as you're working through this, can we benchmark a couple of communities that have existing ones, just to see how we match up the densities?
I haven't found anybody with, density limits on their senior and elderly housing
Really?
type developments. I'll continue to, you know, I didn't go through
Yeah,
an endless list of searches, but I'll keep looking on it.
You just see the headline, Village of Pewaukee pioneers new.
I'm sure they'll make the frame.
See, and when I read this, Mary, I thought
Someone's
this
gonna
was
lead the
like
way.
a 10-unit apartment building. You could put one building with 10 apartments in it.
Right.
You could.
Right?
Versus 10 little homes.
You can configure it however you want.
Yeah.
You can do either way.
You can make little huts if you
As
want.
long as you maintain the offsets.
Tiny homes can be put on the
Do
property.
10 to 10.
Well, that's it. That's why so you're thinking it is one building with 10 units in it.
Could be.
And I think that's how it should be.
We have to start protecting ourselves against the and this is a segment of the multiplex that is a weird hole.
Essentially what you're saying is that it acts a lot like the standard R6 Use Permissions Act. It acts a lot like the RM Permission Uses Act. So why not regulate it in the same manner with respect to density?
Mary, would it make any sense to break these into parts? Because under 7, like I said, we've got 3 distinctively different things all lumped together. That, you know, clinics by themselves, there's no housing for the clinic, the clinic's the clinic. You know, we do have a definition for that. So, you know, instead of having them all lumped into one item, break them out individually. And then we could have, well, and I'm not gonna make this more complicated, but like, we could have a density standard for a standalone nursing home. You could have a standalone for elderly housing, and then we could even come up with one for a mixed use property, in terms of how we would handle that. Because for a true nursing home, a true skilled nursing facility, kind of lesson care, you can have a higher density. You don't have cars, I mean, these people are there. And that wouldn't necessarily have to have the same application, you know? But what we do see trend-wise is these, every day you see in the paper, these communities coming up, every community's dealing with them, Monaco, Muskego, Delafield, City, Village. Yeah, they're all dealing with these kind of mixed-use kinds of senior housing conglomerations, and they're different from the standalone ones. So it might help us if we just literally break these into its pieces, and then we can apply standards that are appropriate for each one. I don't know, what are your thoughts on that? Am I making this more harder than it used to be?
Well, yeah, but.
Maybe making it lengthier, but probably easier to interpret, sort through the criteria for each one. We don't have a whole lot of them, we've got either 1 or 3, basically. I just made a note about rehab centers that often want to be together with nursing homes lately. So we'll work on that.
And whatever we can do to justify the numbers we're coming up with, so it just don't seem like arbitrary numbers.
Well,
That's why I was asking for some benchmarking with other communities that exist, you know?
The numbers
That's why we're trying to use
residential.
our existing multifamily standards,
Right.
to benchmark it in that way to these actually.
That's cool.
Yeah.
A couple other changes just to go through.
Oh,
because
okay, go ahead.
we do have, so this is just changes to the IPS generally. We have no specific lot size in the IPS district. We say it's subject to planning commission approval. That is very fuzzy territory. Much better to have a minimum required lot size. So in this case, again, the village doesn't proactively go out and pre-zone property or pre-designate property to IPS. We haven't done that up to this point. And I don't see us doing it either. The IPS that's in the village right now was either attached at the time of the project being approved, or it was attached as an after-the-fact classification for an existing use. So an acre seems suitable to cover all of what we have, maybe with a couple of minor exceptions for a little pocket park, somewhere. Other than that, I think we're good at an acre minimum. And then minimum building offsets, IPS uses can be a little bit different than residential, for instance, and so adding a provision under 40.338, that if adjoining property is zoned and used for single-family residential purposes, no commercial building or structure will be placed closer than 30 feet to the adjoining single-family residential zone and used lot line, and no accessory structure would be placed closer than 15 feet to an adjoining single-family residential zone or used lot line.
That last sentence, you have no closer than 15 feet, I can think of some properties, some homes that are really close to their lot lines that may be adjacent to these IPS. I mean, thinking 15 feet, that's probably the second row of chairs there, that's awful close. I'd like to see that further.
Well, this isn't the single family houses it's the IBS people.
Right, exactly,
All
yeah.
this is saying is that
Yeah, the
in the
accessory.
IPS, you have to hold your accessory buildings
Yeah.
15 feet away from that neighboring residential.
I like
lot
it
line.
further than
More
15.
is
You want
exactly.
it further.
Oh, okay.
Possible.
I mean, think about it, you open your back door and 15 feet away could be a shed that they're hauling.
Not that far.
Right, I'd like it further.
Well, we currently say that no principal structure can be within 20 feet of side or rear lot line.
That too.
30 feet if the adjoining lot line is single-family residential. So
I would say 25 feet, would anybody have preferred with that?
No.
Could we change that to